This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here he is, the host of the podcast, AWR Hawkins.
Folks, welcome to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart News podcast focused on guns, gun rights, the Second Amendment. You know, we sum these things up here each week under the banner of freedom. Always will, always have. That's because a armed citizen is a free citizen. It's as simple as that. I want to give a shout out my buddy Cal. Cal picked up the Glock 19X and it looked great. He sent a pic of it. I know he took it to the range. He loved it. So, you know, I've handled that gun. That's a great, great firearm. And anyway, Cal's got a great taste in firearms. I'll just put it that way. So, Mowbray, thanks for your interchanges this week, or your exchanges, excuse me. So I appreciate it. Mowbray sent me a story. Sent me a story that I covered this week about a woman who had a Kimber 380 handgun, which that would be the micro carry. Had that handgun hidden in her vaginal cavity upon arrest in Illinois. So we'll leave it at that. Well, I'll say one other thing. That particular firearm, even unloaded, weighs 14.8 ounces. They found it in her vaginal cavity. 14.8 ounces unloaded. That's all I'm going to say. Thanks, Mowbray, for the story. Moving on. Folks, look, we had a terrible situation this week. Another school shooting, Santa Fe High School in Texas. A lot of lessons, though. A lot of lessons. And I don't say this by way of politicizing the shooting. I say it just in a realistic fashion. There are a lot of lessons. The gunman used a revolver and a shotgun, and not a quote-unquote assault weapon, not anything that the liberals usually rant against. And you know I've said on this podcast a number of times, if I were to go into a gun-free zone intending to do harm, I could take a .38 special revolver and a pocket full of bullets and do all the damage I want to do, right? And that's what this kid did. I don't know if he had the pocket full of bullets, but he had the .38 revolver. Folks, once you get behind the line, and by that I mean past the resource officers, if your school does not have armed teachers, once you get past the resource officers, you're home free. You're home free. No one can stop you. Now think about what that means. No one can stop you. Doesn't matter what kind of gun it is. You're the only one with a gun. So we saw that at Santa Fe. 10 were killed, 10 were wounded. Horrendous situation. How did the kid get his guns? He's only 17. They were his father's guns. Now this is important. We stress this at Breitbart. The left's go-to gun controls are, of course, an assault weapons ban, a high-capacity magazine ban, universal background checks, and waiting periods. None of those things. Had they all been law in Texas, none of them would have prevented the shooting. Why? The kid was only 17, so he's too young to buy a gun. So there is no point of sale background check. There is no waiting period for him. He's too young to buy a gun. He won't be doing it, so he won't be going through those processes. An assault weapons ban, we've already covered that. It didn't apply to him. That's not what he used. Nor would the high-capacity magazine ban. See, this is the point we make when the left pushes all this gun control, and then they're like, well, the right is so dug in, they won't give on any common sense gun control. Or they're like, the NRA, it's an evil NRA. NRA opposes common sense gun control, keeps Americans in danger. No. See, people want to act like, well, the NRA opposed universal background checks, and that in turn allows school shootings to happen. The kid was 17. Background checks don't apply. Nothing applies. It's illegal for him to purchase a gun. He broke, I don't know how many laws in just bringing the gun to school. And yes, the school not only has a no firearms policy, but a no ammunition policy. Matter of fact, their policy goes so far that it bans replica guns, BB guns, on and on I can go. This kid broke every rule, every law. Doesn't matter. The point, I'm asking you guys, I'm going to ask you guys, name one law. Just wherever you are, just pause and think. Name one law that would have stopped this attack. Name one. One gun control. Go. Waiting. Somebody say it. Just blurt it out. So you can't do it. You know why? There isn't one. Now, I'm surprised that no one out there said red flag laws or red flag gun laws. Red flag gun laws are those laws that they're using these emotionally tense points. They're using them to pass a confiscation law. So a red flag gun law is that type of law that says if you're a gun owner who seems prone to harm yourself or others, we're going to take your guns away. We're going to get a court order. We're going to come take your guns away. Well, they've done that in Maryland, post-Parkland. They've done that in Florida. You remember Florida's Governor Rick Scott signed a $400 million gun control bill. It included red flag gun laws. Texas does not have them, but guess what? If they did, it wouldn't have made a spit of difference. You know why? The kid was not a gun owner. The kid was 17. A red flag gun law wouldn't have touched him. You see the point? No law would have made a difference. Now, I can tell you a policy that could have made a difference. You want a policy that could have made a difference? When he burst in that art room, the teacher yanks up a Glock and puts a bullet in his skull. That would have been phenomenal. Now, I'm reading two different reports, and I don't know which one is true. I mean, the spirit of both of them, the reports are in agreement in spirit, but the details are slightly different. One report says he burst into that art room and said, "Surprise," and then started shooting. Another says he burst in there and started shooting, was going, "Woohoo," the whole time he's shooting. All right? Now, here's the deal. What changes that? What changes that? What removes that confidence that he obviously felt? What removes that confidence is that art teacher jerks up Cal's Glock 19X and boom, boom. 2 well-placed shots, ball game. That's it. Folks, until we adopt that policy nationwide, there are going to be school shootings with 38 revolvers, 357 revolvers, shotguns, 9mm handguns, 40 cal Smith & Wesson handguns, 357 SIG handguns, AR-15s, AK-47, on and on and on I can go. There's nothing to stop the shootings. Until people who think about doing what this kid did, until those people realize, look, that's a death wish. Until they realize that, until they realize not only is it a death wish, but they may be killed before they even get a shot off. Until they realize that, this is going to keep happening. It's that simple. Harden the schools. Now, I'm going to say this again. I was at the NRA annual meetings in Dallas, and we've talked about that here, and you know that. And I posted plenty of pictures. You know I was there. You could see that on Twitter and Instagram. Why wasn't that meeting attacked? Why wasn't it? I know someone's out there going, that's kind of stupid. You try and be extreme now. No one's going to attack an NRA meeting. Well, here's the reason no one's going to attack an NRA meeting. Because they're going to get shot up real bad. They're going to be lucky if they get a round off. At the NRA meeting, despite what Moms Demand Action and all those other hippies and freaks said, at the NRA annual meetings, people were armed to the hilt. And by that I mean, as I walked through there, you know, Texas is an open carry state. People were openly carrying their handguns on their hips. Now, I was carrying my handgun concealed, but I was carrying one. It'd be hard to figure out how many other people were there carrying concealed handguns for self-defense. So you've got 80,000 people, many of whom are armed. And then around the perimeter, you have police. And then mingling with the people, you have police. People who were there know. Officers were ubiquitous, all right? And you had dogs who were sniffing, walking around sniffing the perimeter and walking and sniffing in the crowd. Folks, this is how you do it. It's not one layer. It's not one layer. If someone had pulled a gun with ill intent in the NRA annual meeting, an officer would have cut them down. And if they had gotten past the officer, if they had done it out of the view of an officer, a law-abiding citizen would have cut them down. And to be honest with you, I would guess far more than one law-abiding citizen would have cut them down. It would have become target practice. Right on? That's why the NRA annual meeting isn't struck. Because to come at that meeting with ill intent is to express a death wish. And the odds are you're going to be the first one to die. Now, that kind of knowledge, that kind of premonition is what people need to be forced to grapple with when they think about shooting up a school. It's that simple. We don't have to be city managers or city planners or superintendents to figure this out. This is easy. We don't need experts to figure this out. We just need common sense. And that's one of the reasons we've had so much trouble solving this problem. Liberals have suppressed their common sense, and they don't have logic. And so liberals have preserved this status quo where schools are soft targets. And it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, I don't know if it's fair to say the liberals have done that. I mean, somebody's done it, but I don't know if it's fair to say the liberals have done it. Well, let's let actor James Woods say it. I covered his statements this week, and I don't believe anyone could have put it better, to be honest with you. I really don't. Woods took to Twitter, and he said, the American people know how to secure our schools, and this is a paraphrase. He said they know because we successfully secured our airports after the terror attacks on 9/11. But Democrats will not support the steps necessary to accomplish that safety. Now, that's a paraphrase of what he said, but that's what he said. Here are his exact words, and I quote, "When fanatic Muslims started hijacking airplanes, we instituted rigid TSA restrictions. Result? No more hijackings in America. It's simple enough to institute security protocols that work for schools. Why won't Democrats support it?" I'm only being quiet so that can soak in. I'm going to read Wood's words again. "When fanatic Muslims started hijacking airplanes, we instituted rigid TSA restrictions. Result? No more hijackings in America. It's simple enough to institute security protocols that work for schools. Why won't Democrats support it?" Folks, this is so telling that it's outrageous, but it's also frightening, because what's happening here is a preservation of a weak stance. In other words, the Democrats' refusal to go along with the security that we know would work, that refusal preserves a weak stance and puts children and teachers alike at risk. I covered shortly after the Parkland shooting, Rush Limbaugh made an observation. You know, he observed that Democrats have spent 2 decades reacting to school shootings by calling for more gun control, seeking more gun laws, but they have not offered one thing to, quote unquote, make our schools safer. In other words, Limbaugh said Democrats go political, quote unquote, after a shooting, and they make tracks for the NRA and for the gun lobby. But they're not doing anything to make schools safer. Now think about that. When Limbaugh's statement and James Woods' statement shake hands, you see the whole story. Woods is using a rhetorical question, asking why Democrats won't support it. Why won't they support the safety? Limbaugh, instead of asking such a question, is making an observation, saying, look, by not supporting it, it allows them to continue to go after the NRA, to go after the quote-unquote gun lobby, to politicize these things. In other words, these shootings, Limbaugh's not saying that Democrats want them to happen, and I'm not going to put those words in his mouth because that's not what he's saying, but these things are expedient for the Democrats. You better believe it. Politically expedient. And shame on them for it. Shame on them. So Woods is right. And Limbaugh is right. And we know how to make these schools safe. Just as I said about the NRA annual meetings, layers. We have to have armed resource officers at every school. We must. That's a must. They have to be there. But they're part of the perimeter in a wide sense. What happens if you get past those resource officers? Well, then we've got to have some teachers. President Trump has said 20% of teachers ought to be armed. That's 1/5. What happens if I want to go, and if someone, I'm not going to say me because I'm never going to think about doing this. What happens if someone wants to go attack a school, and as part of attacking that school, They have to figure out, A, how to get past the resource officers, and then B, how to figure out which fifth of the teachers are armed at that school. Because if they bump into the wrong teacher, it's ball game. See, that changes the dynamic right there. Now add to that what has to be a third layer of security. Limited and controllable entries and exits to a school. You take those three things, and you'll be shocked how quick school shootings go by the wayside. It's just like, again, the NRA meetings. Every door on the building in which the NRA meeting is held isn't open. There are main entrances. You're going to come through those entrances. When you do, every morning when I came in, and I was wearing a press badge, every morning I came in, officers were waving. I say, hey, how are you guys doing? And while these officers are waving and you're looking at them, you're walking by a dog that's sniffing you, right? And that dog, he wasn't the only one there, and he was working the crowd. They would take him through, and just kind of a constant check throughout the day. All of these things together, folks, must be done. They just must. And as the NRA has said, and as Senator Rand Paul has suggested, we'll certainly protect our celebrities with guns and those dogs and officers. We'll do that, but we won't protect our kids at school. We won't protect our teachers. Seriously? Are celebrities and pro athlete games and banks and jewelry stores, are those things really more important than our kids? These are the questions we have to ask when the rubber meets the road. Senator Rand Paul, kudos to you. He came out on the day of the Santa Fe High School shooting and said, we've got to make up our minds. We've got to say it. We are not going to leave our kids defenseless. Kudos to him for saying that. I'm going to tell you what else he said that's poignant, because I just mentioned celebrities. Senator Rand Paul also said this. He said, every Hollywood actor that hates guns has armed bodyguards defending him. So they hate guns unless the guns are defending them. It's just a common sense observation. They hate guns unless the guns are defending them. That's how all these hippies and freaks in Hollywood are. They're duplicitous. They're hypocrites. Someone like a Kim Kardashian. She's a joke, but she can't wait to push more gun control. All the while, she's increasing her personal security contingent, hiring ex-Secret Service agents and so on and so forth. See, good guys with guns must protect her because her life is so valuable. But these kids, these teachers, I guess they're disposable. That's the lesson that they teach us with their actions. It's a sick lesson, but that's what they do. All right? Anyway, folks, the shooting was horrible, but it doesn't give the left a lot of fodder, to be honest with you. It goes against everything that they've been pushing, especially their AR-15s are the weapon of choice mantra. Now, these shootings, of course, always draw out the kookiest of the kooky. And Senator Chris Murphy is always willing to volunteer to be the kookiest. Chris Murphy came out and said the real Second Amendment isn't absolute. This is his reaction, by the way, to the Santa Fe high school shooting. The real Second Amendment isn't absolute. Well, what's he mean, the real Second Amendment? What he means is he's trying to get people to believe that there's a real Second Amendment, which was ratified in 1791. And then there's the Second Amendment that was accepted in 2008 in the District of Columbia v. Heller decision at the Supreme Court. Now listen, before I go any further, just remember this. Senator Chris Murphy is a 17-story building that has an elevator that only goes up to about the 11th floor, all right? If you get what I'm saying. Not the brightest bulb in the knife drawer. That's what I'm saying, all right? Keep that in mind. So Senator Murphy says there's a real Second Amendment and an imaginary one. He said, I support the real Second Amendment, not the imaginary one. And the real Second Amendment isn't absolute. To give you some background on this guy, in 2013, he said that Second Amendment rights aren't God-given. Countered Thomas Jefferson. Countered him. Said they're not God-given. This guy has dangerous views, and it makes a mockery of America that he is a sitting senator. Makes a mockery of our country. But he moved. He moved from saying the Second Amendment isn't absolute to saying that we need to ban assault rifles. Now listen, here's a guy reacting to the Santa Fe high school shooting saying we need to ban assault rifles. Anybody see the problem with this? Yeah, assault rifles weren't even used in the shooting. This is an opportunist. And the thing is, he's at war with your freedom. He's at war with my freedom. He's at war with Thomas Jefferson's worldview. When Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, he said endowed by our Creator. That was a declaration. That was a declaration made to King George III saying, look, on these grounds we declare independence. Our rights don't come from you. They don't come from colonial leaders. They don't come from magistrates. Our rights come from God. This was Thomas Jefferson's declaration. And on that declaration, as fundamental on that declaration, our founding fathers risked their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. They risked it all because they were convinced our rights did not come from a king and would not come from a president or a senate or a house, but came from God. Here we have a sitting senator who's saying bah humbug to all of that. And sadly, he's not the only one. The Houston police chief, this is embarrassing. The Houston police chief came out after the shooting, talked about how he's always supported the Second Amendment. I really support the Second Amendment. But he said, he kind of hinted at maybe now it's time we do a little something gun control-ish. And just to clear the way for that, this is a direct quote. He said, God hasn't instructed me to believe that gun rights are bestowed by him. Now, this is a very telling statement. See, the police chief knows that if our rights come from God, there's nothing government can do to curtail them. He knows that. So he's chopping right at the base there to get rid of the hindrance of having rights being endowed by our Creator. He's getting rid of that hindrance. He says, listen, God hasn't instructed me to believe that gun rights are bestowed by him. So I responded to the chief over the weekend via Twitter and said, maybe read what God instructed Thomas Jefferson and go with that. What do you think? And my point was to try to get this guy to understand he has rejected not a century, but centuries of American history with this ignorant statement. It's not just that gun rights come from God. It's that speech rights come from God. It's that freedom of religion comes from God. It's that the freedom to assemble comes from God. It's that the freedom to pursue property, which James Madison summed up as happiness, it's the freedom to pursue property comes from God. It's the right to be secure in our persons, houses, papers, and effects comes from God. It's the right to a trial by jury of our peers comes from God. I could go on and on. My point is every right in the Bill of Rights, every one of them, comes from God. And if we make one right a bastard right, one right, if we say those rights protected by the Second Amendment, they can be tweaked a bit. They can be regulated. Those, I'm not sure those come from God. If we do that, then we will eventually see that we've done it to all of them because they're all of a cloth. And we can't isolate one and treat it different. We can't do it with the First Amendment rights. We can't do it with Second, Third, Fourth, on and on. Can't do it. Folks, this is just the worldview that our founders held. Now, I know I've said this before, but the time is right, and it's been a while. And, our editor-in-chief, Alex Marlowe, always reminds me there's nothing wrong with being a little redundant every now and then. He'll say that's how people learn. So let me say this. Going through school, I think you all know, we've talked about it before. I did a BA, an MA, and a PhD. Going through school, I don't remember a lot of talk about natural rights, the foundation of those rights and such. In the Great Ones class, I do. Dr. Bruce Brasington. In his class, of course, I do. But apart from that, I don't remember a lot of discussion on those things throughout all of that schooling. And there's a reason for that when you look back on it. Tell me this. You're a student. You plan on teaching, as I did. What's the last thing that the left wants you to understand? The last thing they want you to understand is that you have freedom that they don't supply. If you want to get down to brass tacks, the last thing they want you to understand is that you have freedom that they don't supply. To put it another way, that you have freedoms, liberties, that they don't control. They do not want you to know that, and they certainly don't want you to be familiar enough with it that you can pass it on to future generations when you teach. It's a shame, but it's reality. To the left, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Not in an innocent, hey, we're all in this together, let's learn about our country way. No. Knowledge is power in a way that they want to dispense knowledge, the kind of knowledge they want you to have in order to further their agenda. Folks, think of what it would do to a classroom, to a generation, if when you got to, say, the late 18th century, prior to 1791, of course, just when you start approaching the Declaration of Independence, what if our teachers taught the Declaration that way? The way I did when I opened this podcast, that declaration rests on the declaration that our rights come from God, not from government. What if we taught the Declaration that way? And then we see the American Revolution as a fight based on that declaration. Someone's out there going, well, you can't just make history, do what you want it to do. It all sounds good, but you can't force history to fit into your mold either. You can't just you can't just teach it and make it sound like that's what they wanted to do, that they was all fighting for that declaration. Well, I certainly can. Not because I'm perverting history, because that's what they did. You look at the Puritans. The same Puritans who in the Northeast said, no king but King Jesus, those same Puritans were the ones who were the first to fire, on the English, right? On the redcoats, I should say. The same Puritans, folks, those same Puritans, their banner was no king but King Jesus. Folks, that's not that's not even a full step away from Thomas Jefferson saying, look, we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. I am saying the knowledge that the source of our freedom is God, not man, permeated the whole of the American Revolution. And Puritans fighting under a banner, a literal flag, waving, no king but King Jesus. They fought under that flag and they shot and killed redcoats. Now, what if our teachers taught that? Because it's factual. What if they taught that? And then from that teaching of the American Revolution, they worked toward an application. Once the Bill of Rights was adopted, they worked toward the application. Now look, folks, the reason we have a Bill of Rights is because it preserves the Puritan position, the Jeffersonian position, that these rights are carved out, that these rights are set aside, that government cannot mess with them because these rights were given to you by God, not government. What if we did that for a generation? What if a generation of kids were taught and then went on to teach the truth, which is that my right to keep and bear arms came from God, not from government, and because it came from Him, not them, they cannot take it. What do you think? You think there'd be a revival of freedom? Sure there would. And that's exactly why the left doesn't want it taught. Folks, you're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this. Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with AWR Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or a firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at Breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Folks, I want to go through just some of the news, catch us up. You know, April 2018 witnessed more background checks than any April in history. And this comes on the heels of a March 2018, that witnessed more background checks than any March in history. Now, keep in mind, also in March, the NRA, just one fund, their political action fund, took in nearly $2.5 million, which broke a 15-year record. And I'm telling you these things because what you've got to remember is, while the establishment media parades around gun control activists, follows them around, doesn't ask them any hard questions, lets them make claims that their claims are in contradiction with themselves. They let them get away with everything. And it seems gun control is gaining all this momentum. In reality, the people are rallying to the Second Amendment. In reality, they are. Now, I mentioned Alex Marlowe in the first segment. I talked to him, corresponded with him, I should say, on Sunday after Meet the Press. And I said, you know how you can tell that the gun control push is a facade, that the momentum isn't really there? On Meet the Press, Chuck Todd didn't even mention the Santa Fe shooting until 15 minutes into the show. Didn't even mention it. And even then, when he mentioned it, it was to let everybody know they would be covering it a little later. Folks, when they have the momentum, they come right out of the chute with gun control. But they don't have it. I'm just telling you that. It doesn't mean it's time to relax. No. You keep fighting. But I'm just letting you know, do not believe the depressing worldview you see on the establishment media. NRA membership is up to 6 million, roughly. That's 1 million higher than where it was. 1 million. But Oliver North, incoming president, said it clear. 6 million members. He said it on Fox News Sunday. So we have all-time records for background checks. We have 15-year donation records being broken at the NRA. NRA membership soaring. Folks, do not believe the facade painted by the establishment media. Folks, Debbie Wasserman Schultz came out and said the NRA is, quote-unquote, just shy of a terrorist organization. My response to Debbie Wasserman Schultz? This is the same Debbie Wasserman Schultz, by the way, who had to resign her position as DNC chair because during the primary, it was revealed that the primary was rigged so that no matter how much support Bernie Sanders got, Hillary Clinton would win. But we're having an investigation into what? Russian collusion. That never happened, of course. But that's what we're investigating. All the while, it's already a known fact that the Democrat primary was rigged so that Bernie Sanders didn't have a prayer. All his momentum was for nothing. See, Hillary had to cheat to even get the nomination. And then she got what everybody hoped she'd get. She got beat. And that's it. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz, listen, we don't really care what you have to say, to be honest with you. All right? So that's that. NRA's just shy of a terrorist organization. Whatever. Listen, folks, Kent State graduate made my day after graduating. Kent State has decided, of course, it's legal to open carry in Ohio, and Kent State has decided that guests and such can open carry, but their students can't. So their students have to sit in classrooms disarmed, sitting ducks. So Caitlin Bennett, upon graduating, walked across campus with an AR-10 strapped across her back. She tweeted photos of herself doing so with the hashtag #CampusCarryNow. She held a graduation cap in one hand too, and held it down where you could see the top of it. And across the top of it in white, she had written, "Come and take it." Man, amen. Amen to Caitlin Bennett. Amen. It is unbelievable. Here's what she wrote in her tweet. Now that I graduated from Kent State, I can finally arm myself on campus. I should have been able to do so as a student, especially since 4 unarmed students were shot and killed by the government on this campus. And those of you who don't remember that, if you were educated in a public school, as I was, you have to overcome that by doing a lot of personal reading. Those of you who don't know, but students were killed at Kent State by the government. I believe it was 1970. It may have been 1969. I might have the year wrong. I should just say around that time. All right. Now, I'm not all for Bennett's claim on that, because there's also some evidence that those students were throwing pieces of concrete at National Guardsmen. That's not smart. But her point is well taken, because her point is, if you're not armed, then you're a slave to somebody. And she's exactly right. She took a lot of heat for what she did, and she responded to the heat by saying, I have no apologies for my graduation photos. As a woman, I refuse to be a victim, and the Second Amendment ensures that I don't have to be. Kudos to Caitlin Bennett. Now, to those of you who wonder, AR-10, don't you mean to say AR-15? An AR-10 is a weapon far superior to an AR-15 in power. I know that's hard to believe, because the left says AR-15 is the most powerful gun known to man. AR-15, you could bring down space shuttle. AR-15, you could shoot through a foot of steel, rip through concrete, hit an engine block, stop it. I mean, that's the kind of goofy stuff they say on the left. Of course, they don't know a .223 round from a spark plug. An AR-15 shoots a .223 or a .556. And if you look at that round, it's a 22 bullet. It's a 22 bullet. It's got a lot of powder behind it. And it's moving pretty fast, but it's a small round. Now, an AR-10 shoots a .30 caliber round. And I mean, it's much larger. You're talking about shooting a .308 versus a .223. An AR-10 is just a completely different weapon as far as firepower goes. And when people use an AR platform rifle to hunt, many times you'll see it's the AR-10 that they use, because the ability to drop the animal. That .308 will get her done. And that's what Caitlin Bennett is carrying when she walks across the Kent State campus. A black AR-10 with a beautiful scope on it. She's wearing her little white dress with her black weapon hung right over the back. Again, kudos to Caitlin Bennett. I love it when I see an American. When I see an American, even to myself, I sit in this office and type all the time, and by that I mean I'll just voice something that's on my mind. I'll be sitting in this office, I'll see something like one of her tweets, and I'll go, boom, I found an American. I found an American. Folks, Apple CEO Tim Cook gave the commencement speech at Duke. And what's he do? He praises student gun control activists. I don't even know if I need to park on this long enough to talk about it. Embarrassing. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by him. I'm embarrassed for him. That's all I'll say. I'm moving on. I'm moving on from here. All right. Now, CNN was quick to respond to the Santa Fe school shooting by putting out their list of school shootings that show one school shooting a week every week this year. Wow. So what we're all supposed to do is go, wow, you know what? This is a real epidemic. It's happening all the time. Every week there's a school shooting. People are getting shot every week in the school. Now, if you just read the headline, that would be the effect of CNN releasing this list of school shootings. But guess what? I don't just read headlines. So I read through their list, and wow, would you believe this? Some of their shootings weren't shootings at all. One was the accidental discharge of a legally possessed firearm on a campus by a police officer. It was an accidental discharge. That's a school shooting, according to CNN. One was one student shooting another student with a BB gun. That's a school shooting, according to CNN. One was an accidental discharge of an illegally possessed gun. A 12-year-old brought a gun to school. Police don't believe there was any intent to harm anybody. The gun was accidentally discharged. One kid got shot in the wrist. Another kid got shot. But it was accidental. But CNN, that's a school shooting. And then CNN goes, they admit at the outset, if you read the fine print, their list includes gang violence, domestic violence, drug violence. Folks, If everything is a school shooting, then there are no school shootings. Somehow we have to understand that. Have you ever heard someone explain, the overuse of the word love? I love Mountain Dew. I love mail. I love when I get mail. I love when the sun shines. I love my dog. I love my truck. I love my gun. I love coffee. I love spaghetti. Man, I love lasagna. I love steak and potatoes. I love the Green Bay Packers. I love Texas Tech Red Raiders. By the time we've expressed all that and you come home to your wife or your husband and you say, I love you, what's that word mean? Doesn't mean anything. And that's what they're doing to school shootings. Now, one student shooting another with a BB gun, school shooting. Police officer accidentally discharges weapon, school shooting. But pretty soon, you'll just be able to ignore the phrase school shooting. They've emptied it of meaning. On top of that, they've misled you. Then they've done so badly. There hasn't been a school shooting every week. CNN should apologize. They really should. It's embarrassing that they pass this off as real reporting. You're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Folks, welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. I just want to wrap up with a couple of Second Amendment stories. Second Amendment in action, I should say. In Memphis this week, we had a father who walked out of a McDonald's carrying his infant daughter in his arms. Suspects saw a moment of weakness they could exploit. 4 of them attacking. They're going to take his wallet, rob him, these types of things, allegedly. He puts his daughter down, retrieves a gun, and opens fire. Shoots one of the suspects. All of them flee together. The suspect who was shot is later captured because he went to a fire department to get medical help for his gunshot wound. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. I don't know how many of you are fathers. I know a lot of you are. I've exchanged with a lot of you via email, via Twitter. You don't walk out of a McDonald's with your daughter in your arm thinking you're going to get attacked. But see, evil men look for opportunity. This is why I always say when we talk about concealed carry, we're not talking about being paranoid. We're talking about being prepared. And you have to know that when you flash weakness, they are going to seize the opportunity. The father is carrying his infant daughter out. The 4 suspects see the chance. Fortunately, he had a gun, and that's why I say this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, also, Dixon, Illinois, Dixon High School. We had an attacker, a would-be attacker. He shoots, and the Armed Resource Officer, Mark Dallas, runs to the sound of gunshots. The courage of Dallas cannot be overstated. Bullets are whizzing down the hallway. Dallas runs down that hallway, bullets flying past him. He runs down that hallway toward the sound of the gunshots, and he shoots the would-be gunman. He doesn't kill him, but he ends the attack. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment, and it goes back to the points I made in the first segment of this podcast. We have to have good guys with guns in our schools. We just do. And when there are good guys with guns in schools, we have the opportunity to take out bad guys, dare they come. This is how the Second Amendment is supposed to work, and these are the opportunities it provides us. Thanks for listening this week to the podcast. And listen, get your friends, your family members, your coworkers to go to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, download it. Once you download it, go back to the opening page there and give us a 5-star review. We'll take all we can get. And between now and the next time we're together, always remember, more guns equal more freedom.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.